Welcome to the Leading Change Wherever You Are, Strategies for Women Leaders session of the Women's Place Symposium, Forward Creating Feminist Futures. I'm Diane Florian, the Communications and Project Manager at the Women's Place. This afternoon session will focus on practical tips for leading progressive change at school, work, or in social organizations. During the session, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking, which would be asking a question. Feel free to submit any comments you have to the chat. The chat is now open for everyone. If you have questions for the presenters, please also type your questions into the chat box. At 2:15, we will remain in this virtual meeting room for the rest of the program, so no action will be needed on your part. We will all just stay put here. So our presenters, two presenters today are Kristen Cole and Dr. Angela Fitzpatrick. Kristen Cole is Senior Director of Operations of the Experimental Hematology Laboratory at the James Comprehensive Cancer Center and Chair of the President and Provost Council on Women. She is passionate about facilitating personal and professional growth of those around her. She has played an active role in directly and indirectly mentoring faculty, staff, and students, particularly within the College of Medicine. She believes in helping others at all levels, particularly those in underserved and marginalized populations, to achieve their true potential. Let me check in a minute here. Is my audio good?
Yes.
Okay, I'll continue on then. Just wanted to verify that. Dr. Angela Fitzpatrick is an intersectional feminist activist, educator, and scholar who has been building community, uplifting women, and igniting change on college campuses for more than a decade. She holds a PhD in American Cultural Studies and has presented locally and nationally on feminist leadership and the transformative power of feminist praxis in higher education. Dr. Fitzpatrick currently serves as director of the Catherine S. Eberly Center for Women at the University of Toledo, where she advocates for gender justice and mobilizes change makers through women-centered programming. Next, I'll hand over the virtual microphone to Kristen Cole. Just one more thing before that, check the chat for 2 articles that I will upload for more information on our topic today. And at that, take it away, Kristen.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to get together with everyone to talk about leadership and really being a leader wherever you are. So some leaders are formal leaders, but really more important is to be an informal leader. Having a title does not make you a leader. So we want to talk about how to be a leader when you have, without the title and without the authority, and leading really from wherever you are. So we're going to focus, we could focus on lots of aspects of that, but we wanted to focus on one particular aspect of being a leader. So if you could please open your chat box, I'm going to throw a question in there and I want you to respond with what comes to mind, the very first word that comes to mind when you hear the word negotiate. So if people could just throw those in there. Stress, compromise, pay, salary.
Compromise or settle. Okay.
Advocate, tense. These are win-win. That's good. So Angie and I, we're not going to do like a formal presentation as much as have a dialogue back and forth, and we will be checking in with the chat. But I do have something I would like to screen share as we go forward. So those are good words, but what images come to mind when you think about negotiating? So is it this? Do you picture yourself like, oh Lord, anything but, how can I avoid this? I'd rather have a root canal without anesthesia. It's just painful. Do you picture yourself like this? Or do you have an image that looks like this? I love this picture, where she is not the person with the biggest title. She is not the person that has the authority in the room, But she is clearly making a point, and she really is using some of the things that Angie and I will talk about later on how to negotiate.
And so,
Okay.
you know, one of the things that was interesting when Kristen and I got together to talk about this session is Andrea gave us a list of topics, and I saw negotiation and I thought, nope, don't want to do that. I do not want to talk about negotiation. I've got my head in my hands when I have to do it. I feel like I'm not that great at it. And there's so many other things we can talk about when it comes to leadership. But as Kristen and I got talking, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, one, negotiation has so much to do with leadership, right? Like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. So if you want to lead change, you have to make demands. And that's negotiating, right? It's saying, here's my demand. Now let's work together to see if we can, you know, come up with something where it's a win-win, right? As somebody said in the chat. But the other thing I realized was I might actually be good at negotiation because I do it in a lot of different situations. So yeah, thank you, Kristen, for this great idea. It's a fantastic focus for leadership.
Yeah, it was funny when there were several things that we could have picked, and the very first time, which, you know, my best friend Angie I just met a week ago, but I said, Angie, I think we should do negotiation, and like she said, anything but, and I honestly felt the same way, which was really an indication to both of us that it's really something we needed to talk about. So, Diane, could you launch the first poll? I'm not seeing an icon for that. Okay, so if everyone could take a moment, how would you rate your own negotiating skills? And be honest with yourself. This is not going back to your direct supervisor. So just think about, how would you rate yourself? And Diane, since I didn't launch the poll, you'll have to watch to see when you can share the results.
Okay. Let's see. We have 76% voted.
Okay. Let's give people another minute then. We wanted to take this quick inquiry of the people in this room because, you know, a lot is said about women and how we negotiate, or do we negotiate? So sometimes it's not even really do women negotiate, but what are times when women are even open to negotiating?
Looks like we're about where we're gonna, as high as we're gonna get, so.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let's see. Okay, good. We've got some that are excellent. And luckily, no one who says they're very poor. That actually does not surprise me, given the type of people that would be taking this type of course. What do you think, Angie?
Yeah, I mean, if you're showing up to have a conversation about leadership, I imagine that you are somebody who's putting yourself out there, who's not taking whatever's offered, right? But advocating for what is right and what is fair. And yeah, I'm not surprised that most folks are in the middle, right? I would probably also rate myself in good. I like a challenge. And I generally, you know, I think about what I'm going to do when I go into a situation. I started at the University of Toledo a year ago, and I ended up negotiating for my salary a little bit. And it was only the second time in my life that I've negotiated for a salary. And I was surprised. I got like an extra $5,000 just for saying, hey, I see myself at the higher end of the salary range. This is what I bring. And yeah, $5,000 more. That's amazing. That is a higher base for me to get more raises. It was awesome. Yes, it was.
Yeah, and I rated myself as good too. I certainly could be better. I know with my husband, he does not like to negotiate. So anytime something comes up, he just is like, talk to her. So whenever we purchase something, I'm always the person that's like, oh, okay, yeah. So how much of a discount do we get if we pay in cash? Or, you know, can I have the add-on package for that? But I think it's also a skill that I certainly would like to be better at too.
And so when it comes to negotiating effectively, right, there are really these 3 keys that we should keep in mind, because it's important to be prepared for negotiation, right? We do our best when we really think through the situation, think through what it is that we want to ask, and to be able to anticipate some of the responses that we might get from the stakeholder that we're negotiating with, right? So that we're prepared. So one of the first things to keep about as you enter negotiation is that you have to know your value. And I think this is an area where we as women really struggle. I was talking with a friend of mine a couple of months ago. She wanted to apply for this position at another institution. Sad to see her go, but go out there and get it, sister. And she'd written this cover letter. I didn't know who she was writing about. She was not writing about herself. She wasn't writing about this amazing, powerful, get it done, I see a problem and I solve it kind of woman. She was writing about somebody who assists and oversees and is,
Support.
Yes, yes. And so, it wasn't until I called her up and said, this is not you, right? Like, you are kick-ass. Let's talk about all these different ways that you are just an incredible asset to any team. And I think, too often we don't really know our value. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in the thick of it, right? When I'm busy working, I'm working late nights, there's so much going on, I can finish amazing projects, but then forget that I did this amazing project, right? Or when I'm way out of it, I forget all of the work that went into it. So one of the things that I've done for myself is to start taking note of all of my accomplishments, of all the ways that I contribute to my team. And so this helps me with writing a cover letter, right? Building up my resume. It also helps me though, if there's a situation like, okay, so again, real life example, earlier today, so I'm staying with family right now. I'm in North Dakota. It's snowing outside. Oh God, it's so cold. My 4-year-old thinks it's a winter wonderland. I'm like, oh, I just think it's icky and I'm not ready for winter. But anyway, I'm staying with my auntie and she's amazing. She is an accountant. She's been doing this for 30 plus years. She's a manager and she's hiring another accountant to the team. And she's kind of wondering why all of these young people without a lot of experience are asking for a salary that's only about $5,000 less than hers. And I said,
How much experience does she have?
30 plus years. 30 plus years of experience. And these young kids think that they're going to come in and get this much. I don't think so. And I paused and thought, well, maybe it's time for you to look at compensation in your field, right? Like maybe you are being underpaid. And so we got to talking about her value and all of this, right? And she thought, by golly, I'm going to go and talk to my boss about doing a compensation review and, the things that I bring to the team. And so, even if you don't ever see yourself getting another job and having to negotiate a salary, just keeping that list, right, of the things that you do and the way you contribute and keeping an eye out on trends in your field can set you up to be able to really negotiate and advocate for yourself there.
So, Angie, when you talk about keeping a running list of your accomplishments, one of the things that came to mind is, first of all, no one is going to do that for you. And there are people that I know that they keep a list of the things that they've failed at. Even if it's not a written down list, we always know, oh, that didn't work out. And we don't want to be braggy, but I love that. Keep a list of what's going right, what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think too, it's important to think about, so negotiation, yes, is about advocating for yourself, but it can also be about advocating for your team, advocating for your community. Mm-hmm. And so in those situations, know your value can mean something like, what is the benefit of this thing that we want to bring to our community? What is the benefit of having subsidized childcare at our institution? What is the benefit of having free tampons and menstrual pads in every bathroom, right? There are all these different things that are really valuable. The other person might not see it, right? At most institutions, the person sitting in the president's chair is a man, and he's not thinking about tampons, right? So we have to let that person know. So Kristen, you had some, when we were talking, you had this really great article about office housework and how women, specifically women of color, are disproportionately tasked with that. So what does that tell us about our value?
Oh my gosh, this is like this is one of my pet peeves. So I don't know how many people have heard of the phrase office housework, but office housework, and Diane did put an article in there. I would encourage you to read it. But office housework could be like administrative tasks, like taking notes or finding a mutual meeting time or ordering lunch, which is awesome when that's your job. It can be office housework when that's not part of your responsibility and it's being given to you because you're the woman in the room. But it can also be work that is important but undervalued. So those kinds of things that women often end up taking on, volunteer committees, like the article, one example they give is keeping track of contracts. Like I'm an organizer. Just because I'm an organizer, I don't want to be penalized and have to organize everything for everyone else. Mm-hmm. So think about those types of activities. And Angie and I wanted to use that as an example because this is a really, really great place to practice your negotiation skills, especially as it comes to understanding your value. So think about how you can say no to those things. So for example, if it's a, if you're being asked, you're part of a group and they're asking you, oh, well, why don't you see if everybody could get together and can you find a time for the meeting, to then flip that and say, yeah, it will be great for us to have this meeting, but you know what? Here's how I can contribute. I will decide the program objectives. Mm-hmm. So you still want to participate, but it's not the best use of your time in this particular example. Where can you really add value? And as Angie was saying, with keeping a list of your accomplishments, it's highly unlikely that someone would give you, if they're asking you to order lunch, that they're going to say, can you order lunch and design the program objectives? So you might have to be the person I always say that's the first email. When people don't answer your emails, just put in the subject line, what do you want for lunch? And then, yeah, that's how you get people to answer you. So, and then also we know women are, with the pandemic, doing a lot of that disproportionate amount of work even at home. So let's not do it at work too.
Yeah. And so then it becomes important to negotiate at home with your partner, right? If you are taking care of a home or children with somebody else, right? How do you navigate that situation and feel confident, right? Like, I'm a bread earner as well, and I need to carve out this time to take care of this thing, right? And then, being willing to listen to your partner. What are their needs? How can you work together? We had to create a schedule, right? We had to formalize when who was doing what. Otherwise, we found ourselves getting back into the same argument over and over again. And I think too, with the office housework, I cringed a little bit as I was reading that article because I thought, I'm the person that says, somebody's having a baby, I want to throw a baby shower, or somebody's mother passed away, we need to send flowers, I'll do it. I'm the director of the Women's Center. You know how much stuff I have to do? I do not have time to coordinate baby showers. And so I think now I'm going to go back to my boss and I'm going to say, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were some people in the office who maybe these duties rotate, or we designate someone? Like, let's formalize it, because it's when it's formalized, it's not always falling on the same person.
So who has ever worked with a man that has ordered flowers for a coworker? It is not really a skill. It's just not that hard.
Or a thing that they think about. And, one of the things that folks really appreciate about women in leadership is that a lot of times we bring more empathy and compassion, mm-hmm. right? So we realize this colleague is hurting and we want them to know how much we value them. So let's rally for them. And that's wonderful. But yeah, we can't be undermining our value and undermining our contributions by taking on busy work that detracts from our larger purpose. So know your value. Okay, what do you think? Time for tip number 2?
Number 2,
know the right time. So I'm going to go back to the somebody's been hired on and they're making more money than you and you've been there longer. This happens a lot, right? And I know she was a young woman, very new in the field, and a man came in making more money than her, a little bit older, but same position. And she was really upset. And this was right after the pandemic. And she reached out to me wanting to know what she could do. And I said, well, every institution has a compensation review process, right? And you have the right to pursue that. Is this the right time? Is the pandemic, when they're talking about laying people off and, you know, putting us on furlough, is this the right time to have that conversation with your boss? Or is this a time for you to like reflect, gather all of your details, focus on your self-care, and then when people are less freaked out about everything, you could take it to them? She ended up leaving the institution. So I think for her, it was, that's not a great ending to the story. For her, it was really important that she be seen, that her value be seen and that she be compensated for it. But I do think we've got to think about timing, right? And there are other ways, Kristen, that timing's important, right?
Yeah. So just some simple things. What the time of the day of the week, having uninterrupted time. So if you need to approach someone and you know it's you know, the day before vacation or the day after vacation, just I even will check with someone's administrative assistant. Like if it's a really crucial ask, I'll say, oh, what's today looking like? Those can be really helpful things to do. I actually read in an article to even consider the weather. So for those of us in Columbus, sorry, Angie, today would be a great day to go ask for a raise because it's just absolutely a beautiful, perfect fall day. But you know, it is true when you wake up and it's rainy and drizzly, it's just kind of, it's like a cold, wet blanket. So you can even think about those things. And then think about just that person's mood at the time. And even with, you know, bright sunshiny day and it's the middle of the week, if you go in and you can just sense that it's not a good time for whatever reason, don't be afraid to pivot and just say, no, I just called to say go Bucks or whatever. But I will give you another example of a negotiation that I had when I took advantage of timing. So I work I'm not a researcher, but I work in a very large, with a very large laboratory group of over 100 people. And the postdocs, we have over half of our scientists are women, by the way. And the postdocs were saying when I got there that they had wanted a lactation room for a long time. So we were doing some other renovations. I thought about it, and I was doing a walkthrough with someone from design and construction. And I thought, you know what? Come here, let me show you. So we go in the bathroom, and I use the words that this postdoc used with me. And oh, it's so gross. There's this bathroom and the chair to the side, and they actually have a sign like, don't put gross things on this table. And I said, you know, our female faculty that have children, they actually are pumping and making their child's lunch in this room. We can really do better. So I just took that opportunity. That was much more effective than sending that in an email. And then we, you know, pivoted to showing him what we thought would be an option. But that was a great way to take advantage of the time that I had with that person.
Yeah, that is really smart thinking there. And, you know, sometimes when someone says no, we can also think about how, well, maybe it's a no to this, but could we get a yes on something else? So we're in the middle of a pandemic. We find ourselves working remotely. You know, would it increase your quality of life if you could have flex time, if you could telecommute, right? So there's a no to the pay raise. Perhaps there's a yes to one of these other things. Perhaps there's a yes to more professional development funds, right? And I think too, you know, there's a saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. So how about with the pandemic again, or not the pandemic, the uprising for racial justice this summer? What an amazing time for anybody who works in diversity inclusion or anybody whose office does anything related to racial justice to show up and say, hey, the students out here protesting, they're going to be coming for us next. This is the time when we get more resources, we hire that other person, we do whatever it takes, right? So, you know, really think about the timing and how to leverage that moment, or like you said, how to pivot and back away. But don't lose sight of it, right? No one's saying
Right.
don't do it. It's just be like the lion in the grass, right? Who's just waiting for that moment.
Ready to pounce.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and it's true. Like your example of all the discussions around racial justice, and probably for most people on this call, it's just, it's 2020, and we're discovering that we have racial issues in this country. So, who would think? But take advantage of that. It's right or wrong, it is advancing the conversation. It's getting people thinking, and it makes a good time. So you go ahead.
I was gonna say, so we've got know your value,
Mhm.
know the right time, and then the third one, Kristen, go for it.
Know the right question. So we're going to talk about and I think the importance of questions in negotiation is really important, but really questions for relationship building, for leading, and for management. The power of a question is, it can be very powerful. So I'm going to share screen again, and we're going to talk about diagnostic questions. And so diagnostic questions are moving from a simple yes, no, to something that will provide you more information as you work on your negotiations. So we'll go through a few examples. So your basic question, go to see your boss, can I have a raise? No. Okay. Other ways you could ask that is, maybe one thing you need to ask, how are decisions about pay raises made? So if you have a better understanding of the process, then that's a different way for you to approach it. So is there a certain time of year? Like here at OSU, I know there are 2 times a year when I can ask for raises for people, and we're ready to go. It's not this time of year, not in 2020, but in other years. Is there a review process? What are the limitations? Okay. Who was involved? And Angie and I had who works with senior leadership? Don't take that as an answer. So I'm always really frustrated, and I shared with Angie, I was on a call the other day, and it was about a pay increase for an employee. And the person said, well, I don't know, we have to talk to senior leadership, and I don't know how that will move forward. And I said, could you be a little bit more specific? And who exactly is senior leadership? And they said, Carol. And I said, Carol is on the call. So why don't we just, Carol, is this going to move forward? And what do you need to move it forward? So, we often talk about the organization, the university, the department. Just ask a little bit more specific questions when you get that kind of vague senior leadership. Another way to ask would be, besides salary, what parts of my total compensation can we discuss? And Diane, you mentioned a few things about program development funds. If you're taking a new position, relocation. I think there's a lot that goes into total compensation besides your base salary. And this, especially during the pandemic, when there's a freeze, there are other things that are negotiable. For those of us that are Buckeye fans, I had season tickets, and I sat next to someone who was in a senior leadership position, and she told me that she actually negotiated a bump up on her football tickets as part of her package.
Wow.
I know.
I'd never thought of that.
I had neither. And then what are the metrics that are important to consider? Are they looking for, are there certain goals that you need to achieve? And if you're like Angie and you're keeping track of those, maybe they don't know that you've already considered those. So another example we talked about is gaining support for something.
Yeah. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and we do want to leave some time for Q&A. So I'll go through this fairly quickly, and then we can make time for folks in the audience to ask some questions. Maybe you've got a problem, and hey, maybe we can solve it for you. All right. So let's think about an issue. Right now, we've been never let a good crisis go to waste. At the University of Toledo, we were talking about subsidized childcare, bringing subsidized childcare to our campus. And I have a feeling people are going to say, what? No way. It's too expensive. There's not a need, right? This is just not the right time. This is the perfect time. There is a care crisis all across the nation. And so we have to talk about this. So I would say to them, well, how would you characterize the problem, right? We've got this assessment data where staff are saying, I don't feel supported. So what do you believe to be the problem? All right, next question. What are your objections, right? So what exactly is it about cost that you object to? What is it about need? How can we, what data can we provide to move you forward with this, or to move this forward, sorry. And then what's most important to you, right? So senior leadership, that vague group of people who sit at the top, it might not be important to them that folks have childcare, but what they do care about is retention, and they care about productivity, and they care about student retention, right? So I work in a university. This would be open to students. Here's how we'd help students, right? And so often we see with student parenting that there is a overlap between students of color and student parents, right? And low income students. So how do we, we can bring this all together and make everybody happy. All right, is there another one?
Yes.
Okay, so then what additional information do you need? Oftentimes it's benchmarking. So we look at our peers, we look at our aspirational institutions, and we find out who else is doing this. And if no one else in our field is doing it, then we go and find the biggest, best place that is doing it. We say, this is revolutionary. We have a chance to be on the front end. I also, this isn't negotiation specifically, but I like to get a critical mass following me, right? So I'll talk about this with other people. I'll just bring it up. And then I bring those people with me. We do needs assessment, right? We collect data and we show there is a problem, here's the problem, and here's some different ways we can solve it. And if we can't get subsidized childcare, what other, what are some other things that we could get? Let's review our flex time policies, right? Let's review our telecommuting policies. How can we keep employees with children at this institution, and how can we support students who have children to make sure that we all survive this pandemic intact?
Well, and the noon session with Rebecca Traister, when she talked about anger, that's a great way of getting people around an issue and taking that anger and moving the anger towards action.
Yes, and I missed that. I cannot wait to see the video. It was recorded, right?
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Yeah. So, okay. So those are, know your value, know the right time, and know what kind of questions to ask, right? And how to pivot and ask other questions. So that brings us to the Q&A portion. What questions do you have? Is there something going on where you could use some advice? Angie and Kristen are here to help you out, sister. So what, you can either unmute yourself and ask it, or you could type it to Diane and she will ask it for you.
Or just throw it in the chat too.
Yes. Yeah. We can read. Yeah, we can.
I would be really interested if there's anyone, I think starting a new position. And one thing I tell people, absolutely, you're never going to be at a stronger point of negotiation than when you start a new position. And I would be curious if there's anyone who's maybe starting a new position that might be a point. Have you ever done that, Angie?
Done what? Wait, sorry. What?
Asked, have you ever negotiated pay in a new position?
Yes, I did it my first time out in the field. And I wasn't able to get a salary bump, but I was able to get $1,000 in relocation funds. I was underpaid though, for real. In my next search, I was like, I'm really going to ask. And I prepared and I was so ready. And then she just offered me a lot of money because they needed somebody in there immediately. And I tried to negotiate for a spousal hire and was not able to get that, but the salary was really nice. And then with this last time, I thought, okay, I'm still going to be prepared. And like I said, I asked and I was able to get another $5,000. It was just.
And what does that mean across your lifetime of earning?
Oh, I have got better, my retirement package is going to be better. My actual, anytime that there's a raise, right? We're doing 3% of my salary instead of 3% of $5,000 less, right?
Exactly.
So it really does add up. And one of the things that we know about women and the wage gap is that when we say, what is it, 79, 80 cents on the dollar now across all women. And of course, we know that the gap is greater for women of color, specifically Black women. But it's not just that 20 cents, right? It's that over your entire lifetime. And we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
So it's really quite, we should be angry. We should be mad as hell that we are being underpaid. And I want to say something else.
Say it.
When I was talking to my auntie this morning, I was like, well, how much do the people in leadership make? And she says, oh God, one guy makes 6 times what I make. And I said, boom, see, do not let them convince you that giving somebody an extra $5,000 is going to make or break the institution when this dude makes 6 times what you make, right?
Right.
Rising tide lifts all the boats. Don't suppress this guy, right? Like, advocate for yourself, your colleague, and this kid. So.
No, it's just so true. And I know when I've hired people, I also think about people that I've hired, and it does not happen as much as I would think it would, but people who then ask, could you get a little bit more salary from me?
Yeah.
And I respect that. And there have been, I'm thinking of one particular example when someone said, and I really went to bat for this person, this woman, it was a woman, and I really went to bat to get her a good salary. And I presented it to her and she said, can you do a little bit better? And I went back, and again, I work at OSU, and for people who work at large institutions, I went back and sure enough, they came up with a little bit more. And I was like, you know what, sister, good for you. Good for you for asking that.
And another thing that I see come up when I manage people is that they want promotions. And it can be difficult in higher ed particularly. And I've only really worked in higher ed. I know we have some people here from the industry, but it can be difficult to promote people. One of the things that an HR person reminded me of, right, is we've got this program coordinator and she's amazing and she really wants to be an assistant director, but that line's not open. We can't really make that jump. But there are other things in between a coordinator and a director or assistant director. There's a program manager and a program director. So, if you're in a role right now and you know that you are doing an amazing job and you believe that you deserve to be not necessarily take on extra responsibility because you're already doing that, right? You want more money and you want the title. I say, if you've got a supervisor who, is an advocate for you, sit down and just say, I'd like to grow here. What are some other opportunities? Are there other roles that I could take on, other titles? And if your supervisor isn't somebody who would help you through that process, go to HR, look around on their website, see what other classifications are available. And perhaps there's a way for you to advocate for yourself to get there.
Point number 1, know your value. That's about knowing your value.
Know your value.
And I would say absolutely the title, it just drives me crazy when I see colleagues or women that I really respect, that I know are doing awesome work, that don't have the title to get with it.
Yes.
And it's not all about titles. Titles do not make leaders, but we often do have to advocate for ourselves to have the title. And again, knowing your value, keeping track of what you do, ask for those stretch assignments. Those can all lead to the promotion that you need and deserve.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And one thing I've seen that frustrates me is getting a new title, which is great, getting more responsibilities and not getting the pay to go with it. That really frustrates me.
Yes. And again, the point of your greatest power in negotiation is at that change. So that would be, I can take on more. I'm capable of taking on more, but these are the circumstances that are going to be acceptable. I do, taking on more responsibility and not getting additional pay, at what point, I'm thinking of a faculty member, oh my gosh, I cannot make this stuff up. She is a senior tenured faculty member who is just awesome. And she's a researcher with a PhD. and she was asked to take on an administrative role, and they literally said, "You're so good at organizing stuff." And they were going to make her co-director, and she was so upset. And we talked about it, and I just said I'd turn it down.
Yeah.
And she did, and it was really a good thing, unfortunately, for her to do, because they were giving her, not even really giving her the whole title, but they were giving her the office housework at a tenured professor level even.
We have 2 questions now. Our first question is from Sarah Palmer. As a female without a degree, but years of experience and knowledge, what is the best way to negotiate or advocate for yourself?
Angie? Or I can go.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. So I think there's no magic in a degree. There really isn't. And so when you are talking to whomever you're talking about, I would make it about the outcome, and we keep going back to the value. So having a degree doesn't mean that someone is effective. It doesn't mean that they can lead and motivate people or get projects done. So I would really go back to the value that you add to the organization, and really being specific about what you've done. And this is where the diagnostic questions can come to play. So not asking so many yes, no's, but asking a question about, because maybe they're using that degree as kind of an excuse. Like, okay, no, you don't have a degree, blah, blah. But if you start asking more diagnostic questions, you might get at really what some of the objections are, and you can address those.
Yeah. Likewise, the degree is not as valuable as some folks think, although I recognize it can be a barrier. I do recognize that. One of the things that's frustrated me over the years as both a mentor to college students and as a hiring manager is when students are like, well, I took women's and gender studies classes. Why couldn't I be the assistant director of the Women's Center? And I'm like, because you've never done the work, right? Like I can't train you. Just because you were good in class doesn't mean you're going to be good at building a program or supervising students, right? So I always value the demonstrated experience over the degree. And obviously when knowledge and experience are combined, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, if you've got that experience, I say, go for it.
Sarah has a follow-up. She says, if it is in regards to negotiation of position or title and not so much the pay, would it be the same way to negotiate?
Diane.
Oh, great.
It's okay. So, I mean, when you're in a situation where an entity is going with a process that requires degrees to move up, but that's not always the case, and then you're, trying to advocate and move up without, degrees are expensive, and, but you have those years of experience to then try and, garner yourself to be in that position to try and move up.
Again, I think that back to the diagnostic question. So if you are seeing people, educational levels can be a limiting factor, and there are some where it's just a hard stop and a hard no. But if you're seeing that that's not the case, then I would start asking those questions, like under what circumstances would my experience doing A, B, and C compensate for the degree or be equivalent to the degree, especially if you're seeing other people. I'm sorry, once you've made the exception, once an institution has made the exception, that becomes your policy. If you've done it, it's your policy.
And I would say too, Sarah, what industry do you work in?
I actually work in the patient access field so not so much administrative, but I call it patient access. So where we work within, the James as an entity, but we are within, scheduling world. So, almost that type of situation where you're working with customers, but leadership and providers, but you are, more HR type of.
So it's helpful. Have you seen the job description for the job you want? And does it really say that you can't have it if you don't have this certain degree?
Within certain changes that are occurring, it will be made that way. But having known some colleagues who have been promoted previously, they are not with degree.
And Sarah, maybe another question to ask, because if you're getting a no from one particular person, maybe another question to ask would be to ask about who else has knowledge about this.
Okay.
Because you're at a big institution, and so
Right.
that might be the ones you need to separate out someone's opinion or their preference versus what is our policy. And as I said,
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I would
Do you have another question? Or do you want to go ahead, Angie?
just one last thing. Looks like we lost Kristen for a minute there.
as soon as a practice, if it's not what's written.
Yeah. Sorry, Kristen, we lost you for a second there. One other thing, find your allies. Do you have allies in this environment? Find your allies, because if they're about to make policy change that will prevent a lot of people from getting promotions, now is the time for a bunch of people to say, excuse me, that doesn't seem fair. Let's, can we revisit this? Can we reevaluate that? And if you aren't the person that is able to speak up, find the person who will. I'm that person at my institution. I always ask the questions that can get folks in trouble, because I don't mind trouble. And I'm a white woman, right? Like, people will give me a pass, and I use my privilege in that way. So, Diane, you said there was another question?
Yes, question from Lisa Price. So many gold nuggets today, she mentions. How can this be used in a union environment?
So remember, negotiation is just not all about pay and not all about positions. We are focusing a lot on that because that's probably one of the first things that comes to mind. And when I put the question in the chat about what comes to mind when you think about negotiation, salary, pay, those are things that come up. So I do think that increasing and improving one's ability to negotiate has benefits across a wide spectrum. Again, we talked about the office housework, and even if you aren't in an office environment, but doing, are you getting stuck with those non-value added things? What are things that make your job less enjoyable, make your life less enjoyable? Things that don't lead to your promotion and advancement. And so, Lisa, I don't know if that's what you mean by used in a union environment. I'm thinking salary and positions, but I don't know if you're thinking about it in a different way.
Well, actually, we're about at our time to start wrapping it up. So I want to thank you, Kristen and Angela, for your time today and all your insight and all your tips and highlights as to what to do. I just want to go over a few insights from today's session. Things such as negotiation is about working with the leadership, creating a solution together. Know your value, keep a running list of your accomplishments, new skills, and other contributions to the team. Decline to organize the meeting and take a larger assignment, such as developing the objectives. Know the right time to initiate a negotiation. Kristen mentioned check with the person's administrative assistant maybe about their mood. For project negotiation, demonstrate that the project is important for the common good. So those are just some of the highlights I thought I would go over. If there's any closing comments.
And just a reminder that 2 of the articles that we referenced are in the chat that you might find helpful. One about negotiating tips and the other about office housework, both of those from Harvard Business Review. And Angie, you put a tip in there.
Yeah, so the last thing that I wanted to share is this book, The Feminist Fight Club. It's a survival guide to a sexist workplace. And I really like this book because it takes these common things like interruption, having your work taken, the credit for the work taken from you, all of these things. And it gives you tips that you can use depending on your location and the organization. So maybe you're the person who runs meetings. How could you create meetings, a meeting structure that is equitable? You're the person being interrupted. You're a friend to the person. So this to me is one of the best guides for leading change from wherever you are. And you can take this to any organization that you're in. So thank you for coming today. It was really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.